Hello there, everyone. Welcome to Whisper Zone. I am your storyteller, and I'm here to guide you tonight. I know many of you use these videos to drift off to sleep, so before we begin, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. I'm always curious. Where are you watching from, and what time is it in your part of the world? Now, find your cozy spot and relax. The blood trail made no sense. I've tracked injured animals for 18 years as a ranger in Olympic National Park, but I'd never seen anything like this. The dark red drops went up trees at impossible angles, like whatever was bleeding had crawled straight up the trunk and across branches that couldn't hold the weight of a large animal. Mike, you need to see this. James Wright, my partner of 3 years, called from behind a cluster of Douglas firs. His voice had an edge I'd never heard before. I followed his voice, my boots crunching on fallen pine needles. The campsite that came into view made my stomach turn. 3 tents were shredded like paper, sleeping bags and backpacks scattered everywhere. Deep claw marks ran through the heavy-duty fabric, not like any bear or mountain lion I'd ever seen. These cuts were deliberate, almost surgical in their precision. "Thompson, look at these tracks." James pointed his flashlight at the ground. The prints were huge, bigger than any wolf track, and they seemed to shift between animal and human. Some showed clear toe marks, almost like a person's footprint, while others had deep claw marks at the tips. My grandfather's stories about the night walkers flashed through my mind, but I pushed them away. I was a ranger, not a scared kid listening to campfire tales. That's when I saw the symbols. Scratched into the bark of several trees were markings I recognized from the petroglyphs near the reservation, ancient warnings my people had left hundreds of years ago. My hand automatically went to the medicine bag hanging under my uniform shirt, the one my grandfather gave me before he died. James whistled low. "Mike, either we've got the smartest bears in Washington or..." His words cut off as a branch snapped in the darkness. We both swung our lights toward the sound. For just a second, I caught a glimpse of eyes reflecting our beams. Not the yellow-green shine of normal animal eyes, but a deep burning red that seemed to stare right through me. Then the eyes blinked and vanished, but not before I saw how high up they were. Whatever we were looking at had to be at least 7 feet tall, standing upright among the trees. A howl broke through the night, but it wasn't like any wolf I'd ever heard. It almost sounded like words, like someone trying to speak through an animal's throat. James grabbed my arm, his fingers digging in hard enough to hurt. "Tell me that was just a wolf," he whispered. I wanted to lie to him, but after 18 years, in these woods, I knew better. Something was out there, something my ancestors had warned about, and now it was watching us. "We need to call this in," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Get forensics out here, search teams." Another howl cut through the night, closer this time, and another answered from a different direction. We were being surrounded. That's when I remembered the other part of my grandfather's stories. The night walkers never hunted alone. They moved in packs, and they were always hungry. For the first time in my career as a ranger, I felt like prey in my own forest. That night, I had the strangest dream. I was running through the forest, but not on 2 legs. I was on all 4s, moving faster than I'd ever moved before. The ground felt different under my hands. No, not hands, but something else. I could smell everything. The damp earth, a deer that had passed by hours ago, the lingering scent of campfire smoke miles away. Most scary of all, I wasn't alone. Other minds pressed against mine, like whispers in my head. They were calling me, telling me to join them, to become part of something bigger. I woke up gasping for air, my heart pounding. My bed sheets were tangled around my legs, and that's when I noticed my feet were covered in mud and pine needles. But my bedroom window was closed and locked, just like I'd left it. "You're losing it, Thompson," I muttered to myself. But when I got to work that morning, things only got weirder. James looked terrible, like he hadn't slept at all. "Mike," he said quietly when I walked in, "I had these dreams." Before he could finish, a call came in. A hiker had found something strange near Cedar Creek. When we got there, my blood ran cold. Dead rabbits and squirrels were arranged in a perfect circle, their heads all pointing to the center. In the middle was a deer, but it wasn't torn apart like normal predator kills. It was laid out carefully, almost like an offering. "This isn't natural," James said, taking pictures with shaking hands. "No animal does this." I walked around the circle, trying to think like a ranger and not like the scared kid who used to listen to his grandfather's stories. That's when I spotted the petroglyphs on a nearby rock face. They were old, really old, but I recognized the symbols. The same. One's from the campsite. I pulled out my phone and called Billy Blackhawk, one of the tribal elders. "Uncle Billy," I said, even though he wasn't really my uncle. "Can you translate something for me?" I sent him a photo of the symbols. The phone was quiet for so long. I thought we'd lost connection. "Mickey," he finally said, using my childhood name. "Where exactly did you find these?" I told him. He took a deep breath. "Those are warnings about the Nightwalkers, the people who walk between human and wolf. Our ancestors wrote those marks as boundaries, lines they wouldn't cross." His voice got very serious. "Mickey, where did you say you found the dead animals?" I described the circle. The phone went. "Quiet again. They're marking their hunting ground," he said. "And they're sending you a message. They know you're there and they're watching." Just then a howl echoed through the trees, but this one was different. It sounded almost like words, like someone saying "join us" through a wolf's throat. James E. grabbed my arm. "Did you hear that? Tell me you heard that." I nodded slowly. More howls answered from different directions, each one sounding more human than the last. The voices in my head from my dream came rushing back. That night I dug out my grandfather's old journals. He'd written about the Nightwalkers, about how they could get in your head, make you see things, make you want to join them. The only protection was the sacred tobacco in my medicine bag, which I now kept with me all the time. But as I read more, my hands started shaking. According to my grandfather, the Nightwalkers didn't just want to kill. They wanted to transform people to make their pack bigger. And they always started with dreams of running through the forest. Dreams exactly like mine. I looked out my window at the dark forest. Somewhere out there, red eyes were watching. And they were getting closer every night. The night everything changed started like any other late shift at the ranger station. James and I were going through reports of missing hikers. There had been more than usual lately. The rain was drumming on the metal roof and the woods were pitch black beyond our windows. That's when all our radios started crackling with static at once. "Probably just the storm," James said, but his voice was shaky. He hadn't been himself lately, falling asleep at his desk, staring into space, talking about strange dreams. I walked to the window and peered into the darkness. At first I saw nothing but rain and trees. Then a flash of lightning lit up the clearing around our station. They were there, standing at the edge of the trees. 7-foot-tall shapes that looked almost human, but wrong. Their black fur had silver streaks that glowed in the lightning. But it was their eyes that made my heart stop. Bright red circles in the darkness, all fixed on our windows. "James," I whispered, "don't move." He was already at another window, his face pale. "I can hear them, Mike. In my head. They're calling me." I knew what he meant. The voices were in my head too, like a dozen whispers all at once. They were telling us to come outside, to join them, to become part of something bigger. My legs actually started moving toward the door before I caught myself. I grabbed my medicine bag and pulled out the sacred tobacco, just like my grandfather had taught me. I sprinkled it across all the windowsills and doorways, my hands shaking. "What are you doing?" James asked. His voice sounded different, dreamy almost. "Protection," I said. "Don't look them in the eyes." But James didn't seem to hear me. He was pressing his hand against the window glass, staring at the creatures. Their red eyes seemed to glow brighter. Suddenly, all our lights went out. The computer screens died. Even our flashlights wouldn't work. The only light came from those glowing red eyes outside every window. I heard a scraping sound, claws on the metal walls of our station. They were surrounding us. testing for ways in. The voices in my head got louder, more demanding. "We need to call for backup," I said, reaching for my phone. No signal. "Why?" James asked in that same dreamy voice. "They just want to help us. They want to make us better." He started walking toward the door. I grabbed his arm. "That's not you talking, James. Fight it!" He turned to look at me, and my blood ran cold. His eyes had a reddish tint to them, just like theirs. Something huge slammed against our door. The whole station shook. I could hear them breathing now, deep, raspy sounds that were almost like words. I pulled out my grandfather's medicine bag and pressed it into James's hands. "Hold this, don't let go." He blinked a few times like he was waking up. "Mike, what's happening to me?" Another slam against the door. The hinges were starting to bend. "Whatever happens," I said, "don't look in their eyes, and don't listen to Bai." The voices. But as I said it, I could feel their thoughts pressing harder against my mind. Images of running through the forest with incredible speed and strength. Promises of power, of belonging, of becoming something more than human. The door burst open with a crash of splintering wood. Red eyes filled the darkness, and James screamed. I don't remember how I made it through that night at the station. When backup finally arrived at dawn, they found me clutching my medicine bag, surrounded by broken furniture and deep claw marks on every wall. But James was gone. He just walked out with them, I told the search team. I couldn't tell them about the red eyes or the voices in our heads. They'd think I was crazy. "We have to find him." The search team spread out, but I knew where to go. The voices in my head were pulling me northwest, toward the deepest part of the forest. Every step I took, the whispers got louder. "Join us. Find us. Become us." I followed James's tracks through the mud. At first, they were normal boot prints. Then they started to change. The heel marks got lighter, like he was walking more on his toes. The stride got longer, and there were claw marks at the tips. My heart was pounding as I recognized other signs. Broken branches 7 feet up, trees with deep scratches, and more of those ancient symbols carved fresh into the bark. The pack had been through here, and recently, the trail led to the base of a cliff I'd never seen before, even though I thought I knew every inch of this forest. There was a narrow crack in the rock face, and the tracks led right into it. I clicked on my flashlight and squeezed. Through. The passage went down, deep into the earth. The air smelled wrong, like wet fur and something else I didn't want to think about. That's when my light beam hit the first bone. The tunnel opened into a huge cave, and it was full of remains, torn backpacks, shredded camping gear, and things I wish I hadn't seen. But what scared me most were the fresh changes of clothes neatly folded in piles, like people had carefully undressed before. I heard movement deeper in the cave. "James," I whispered. "You came." The voice was James's, but wrong, deeper, rougher. "They said you would." He stepped into my light beam, and I almost dropped my flashlight. James's skin was covered in patches of black fur. His fingers ended in claws, and his eyes were starting to glow red. "They showed me the truth, Mike," he said, taking a step toward me. "We don't have to be weak anymore. We can be like them, strong, free, part of something bigger." He reached out one clawed hand. "Join us, please." Behind him, red eyes began appearing in the darkness, dozens of them. The cave was full of night. Walkers and their thoughts hit my mind like a tidal wave. They showed me everything. How they chose people to join their pack, how the change happened, how they'd been doing this for centuries. Each transformation made the pack stronger, their mind link more powerful. "Your grandfather knew," James said. "That's why he left you the medicine bag. He knew you'd be chosen." I clutched the bag tighter, fighting against their voices in my head. James took another step closer, more wolf than human now. "Don't fight it, brother," he growled. "Let us show you what you can become." The red eyes moved closer. The cave walls seemed to pulse with their thoughts. And somewhere in the dark, something howled, a sound that was both human and not human at all. I backed away from James, my shoes crunching on old bones. The medicine, Bag felt warm in my hands like it was fighting against the pack's power. "Remember who you are, James," I said. "Remember your family, your kids." For a second, something flickered in his red eyes. My daughters? But then one of the night walkers stepped forward, bigger than the others, with silver streaks running through its black fur like lightning. It put a clawed hand on James's shoulder, and his face went blank again. "Too late for that," James growled. "I have a new family now." I turned and ran deeper into the cave. Their howls echoed behind me, but I knew what I was looking for. The symbols on the cave walls were getting older, deeper. This place was ancient. The tunnel opened into a circular chamber. Stone carvings covered the walls, the same warnings. My grandfather had shown me as a kid. This was a sacred place, a place of power. The night walkers and James poured into the chamber after me, but they stopped at the edge like something was holding them back. "Smart," the big one spoke, its voice like gravel. "You found the old place, but it can't protect you forever." "Why are you doing this?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "We were like you once," it said. "Weak, alone. Now we are strong, together. We give that gift to others." "Gift?" I looked at James, who was now more wolf than man. "You call this a gift?" The pack leader stepped forward. "Your grandfather understood. He was chosen too, but he refused us, left us. That was his mistake." It pointed one clawed finger at my medicine bag. "He gave you that to keep us away, but he also gave it to you because he knew you would be stronger than him." The voices filled my head again, stronger than ever. Images of running with the pack, of incredible power, of never being alone. Again, I felt my legs shake. Part of me wanted it. Part of me wanted to give in. Then I remembered something else my grandfather told me, about how the medicine bag had two purposes, protection and power. I opened the bag and pulled out the sacred tobacco. The night walkers tensed, but instead of sprinkling it like before, I did what my grandfather had taught me. I spoke the old words and blew the tobacco into the air. The chamber filled with a strange light. The tobacco smoke swirled like it was alive, forming shapes in the air. Wolves, eagles, bears, the spirits of the forest. The night walkers howled in pain. The pack leader staggered back. "James!" I shouted. "Take my hand!" He was fighting it now, clawing at his own face, human and wolf battling inside him. I can't," he gasped. "Trust me, brother." He looked at me with those red eyes. Then, just for a second, they turned brown again. He reached out. Our hands met as the tobacco smoke swirled around us. The night walkers lunged forward, but the spirit animals drove them back. James screamed, a sound that started as a howl and ended as a human cry. Then everything went white. I woke up in the hospital 3 days later. They told me search teams found me at the mouth of a cave, alone. There was no sign of James, no sign of the pack. Just deep claw marks in the stone and scattered tobacco from my grandfather's medicine bag. The official report said James went missing in the line of duty. They never found his body, just his torn ranger uniform near the cave entrance. I tried to tell them what really happened, but they sent me on administrative leave instead. Said I needed time to process the trauma. That was 6 months ago. I'm back at work now, but everything's different. They made me the tribal liaison officer, a desk job pushing papers instead of patrolling the forest. Maybe it's better that way, but sometimes on full moon nights I hear the howls. They sound more human each time, like they're trying to form words. And in my dreams, I still feel the pull of the pack mind, still see those red eyes watching from the darkness. The strangest part? Every month, more ancient symbols appear on trees throughout the park, and hikers report seeing a lone, wolf-like creature with brown eyes instead of red, watching them from a distance. It never attacks, never comes close, just watches like it's protecting them from something worse. I keep my grandfather's medicine bag with me always now. Some nights I think I hear James's voice in my head, fighting against the pack's control, warning me, telling me there's still out there still hunting, still looking for new pack members. Yesterday, I found fresh claw marks on my cabin door, 7 feet high. And when I checked my security camera, I saw something that made my blood run cold. James, half human and half wolf, leaving a warning carved into my porch. They're coming back for you, brother. I should be scared, but part of me is ready. My grandfather didn't just leave me a medicine bag. He left me his journals, his knowledge, his strength. The Nightwalkers thought they could break us, turn us into monsters like them. But they forgot something important. Some bonds are stronger than pack magic, and some wolves protect instead of hunt. So I'll be ready when they come. I'll be ready to fight for James, for my grandfather's legacy, for all the people who need protection from the darkness. Because that's what rangers do. That's what family does. And somewhere in the forest, under the full moon, a lone wolf howls. A sound caught between warning and welcome, between human and beast, between what was and what might still be. The Nightwalkers are watching, but this time, I'm watching back. I've seen a lot of strange things in my years as a wildlife photographer, but nothing prepared me for what I found that morning in Mount Baker's Snoqualmie National Forest. The air felt wrong somehow, heavy and electric, like just before a big storm, but there wasn't a cloud in the sky. I was investigating some weird cattle deaths that local ranchers had reported. As a former smoke jumper turned wildlife photographer, I often helped the Forest Service with cases like this. Usually, it was just wolves or bears, maybe a mountain lion. This was different. The first dead cow I found looked like it had been struck by lightning, but from below. Its body was charred in a pattern I'd never seen before, spreading up from its hooves like dark tree branches across its skin. My camera started acting up as soon as I tried to take pictures, the screen flickering with static before going dead. Brand new batteries, completely drained. That's when I saw the feather. It was lying in the grass near the cow, about 3 feet, long and metallic looking, like polished steel but light as aluminum. When I picked it up, my arm hair stood on end, like when you rub a balloon on your sweater. I've worked with birds of prey for years, photographing eagles and condors, but I'd never seen anything like this. The strange finds didn't stop there. Following a trail of scattered feathers and dead animals, I came to the base of a cliff face. What I saw made my stomach drop. Carved into the rock were 3 massive parallel grooves, claw marks, each one deeper than my arm's length. They ran up the cliff face for at least 30 feet. My hand trembled as I touched the marks. Despite the morning sun, a chill ran down my spine. The rock around the grooves was scorched black, and my fingers came away coated in a fine metallic dust that sparkled in the sunlight. I thought about calling my wife Maria. As a park biologist, she'd know what to make of these markings. But my phone was dead too, just like my camera. Even my backup battery pack showed no signs of life. That's when I heard it, a sound so deep it made my bones shake. Like thunder, but somehow alive. The air crackled with electricity, and every hair on my body stood on end. My old fear of lightning kicked in, making my heart race. But I couldn't move. I could only stare up at the clear blue sky, knowing that whatever made those marks, whatever killed those cattle, it was still out there. And somehow I knew it was watching me. I didn't realize then that this was just the beginning, that Maria and I were about to uncover something that should have stayed buried in legend, something that would change our lives forever, and not in a good way. Looking back now, I wish I'd walked away that morning, but I didn't. Instead, I took one more picture of those claw marks, packed up my dead equipment, and headed back to report what I'd found. That decision would end up costing me everything I held dear. Back at the ranger station, Maria was already excited before I even showed her the feather. She'd spent the morning talking to old Joe, one of the tribal elders who often helped with wildlife surveys. "David, you won't believe what Joe told me," she said, her dark eyes shining with that look she got when she was onto something big. "The local tribes have stories about a thunder spirit that lives in these mountains. They say it brings storms and hunts from the clouds. I pulled out the metallic feather from my bag. Like something that might leave this? Maria's mouth fell open. She grabbed the feather with her gloved hands, already in research mode. This is impossible. The metallic sheen, the size. It doesn't match any known species. That's when the lights in the station flickered. Outside, the sunny day had turned dark, like someone had pulled a heavy curtain across the sky. But the weather report that morning had promised clear skies all week. "There's more," I said, showing her the pictures I'd managed to take before my camera died. "The claw marks, the cattle. Something big is out there, Maria. Something that doesn't make sense." Over the next few days, weird things kept happening. Hikers reported seeing strange lights dancing on the mountain peaks at night. All the deer and elk that normally lived in the high meadows had moved down to the valleys, like they were running from something. Even the birds had gone quiet. Then Maria found the bones. She called me up to a cave near the tree line, excitement making her voice shake over the radio. "These bones, David, they're like nothing I've ever seen. The structure suggests a bird, but the size, it would have had a wingspan bigger than a small plane." I was about to answer when my radio crackled with static. The cave went dark as clouds rolled in from nowhere. That deep thundering sound I'd heard before echoed off the mountains. Maria grabbed my arm. "Look," she whispered. Through the clouds, something moved. Something huge. Its wings looked like sheets of metal catching the last bits of sunlight. Lightning flickered inside the storm clouds around it, making its feathers glow blue. We stood frozen, watching it glide past our cave. Neither of us spoke, neither of us even breathed. The air felt like it was full of electricity, making our skin tingle. Later, when we were safe back at the station, Maria couldn't stop talking about what we'd seen. She wanted to study it, track it, document it. But all I could think about was how the creature had moved through those storm clouds like it was controlling them. "This could be the discovery of the century," Maria said, spreading her research papers across our kitchen table that night. "A living prehistoric species. Or, could be dangerous," I said, remembering those dead cattle, the scorched claw marks. "Maybe some things should stay undiscovered." Maria just smiled and squeezed my hand. Since when did my brave smoke jumper get so careful? I didn't tell her about the fear growing in my gut, about how every time I heard thunder now I wondered if it was really just the weather, or about how my old fear of lightning was getting worse, making my hands shake every time the sky darkened. I should have listened to that fear. Should have made Maria listen too. Because the next day, everything went horribly wrong. It happened during my night shift at the ranger station. The power had been going on and off all evening, and my weather radar kept showing storm patterns. That made no sense. One minute the screen was clear. The next it showed a massive storm cell right on top of us. But when I looked outside, there wasn't a cloud in sight. Then everything electronic in the station went crazy. The computers sparked, light bulbs popped, and my radio started screaming with static. The metal filing cabinets rattled like someone was shaking them. My keys lifted off the desk by themselves, drawn to the ceiling like a magnet was pulling them. That's when I heard it, that deep rolling thunder that wasn't really thunder at all. I ran to the window just in time to see it land in the clearing, outside the station. The creature was even bigger up close. Its feathers looked like they were made of burnished metal, and blue electricity crackled between them like mini lightning bolts. Its eyes glowed like storm clouds with lightning inside them. My whole body froze. Ever since I was a kid, when lightning struck a tree next to me during a camping trip, I'd been terrified of electrical storms. Now I was staring at something that seemed made of lightning itself. The creature, the Thunderbird, turned its head toward the station. Our eyes met, and in that moment I knew it was intelligent. This wasn't just some animal, it knew exactly what it was doing. A huge bull elk was grazing at the edge of the clearing, completely unaware of the danger. The Thunderbird's eyes flashed, and a bolt of lightning shot from its wings, striking the ground near the elk. The flash was so bright it left spots in my vision. When I could see again, the elk was lying on its side, stunned but alive. The Thunderbird moved faster than anything that big should be able to move. In 2 steps, it crossed the clearing, grabbed the elk in its massive claws, and launched itself into the air. The downbeat of its wings sounded like a thunderclap, shattering 2 windows in the station. I watched it disappear into the night sky, carrying the elk like it weighed nothing. All the metal objects in the station crashed back to the floor. The computers came back on, blinking like nothing had happened. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely work my phone to call Maria. When she finally answered, I could barely get the words out. "I saw it," I said. "Up close. Maria, this thing, it's not just big, it's something else, something impossible." "I'm coming over," she said, and I could hear her already grabbing her gear. "Don't move. Don't do anything until I get there." But I was already thinking about those claws, about how easily they'd lifted that elk, about how the creature had used lightning like a weapon, and most of all, about the intelligence I'd seen in those glowing eyes. "Hurry," I said, watching the sky through the broken window. "And Maria, bring your rubber-soled boots. I don't think metal equipment is going to be safe around this thing." I didn't know then that we were about to make an even bigger discovery, one that would put us both in more danger than we could imagine. "We have to find its nest," Maria said the next morning, spreading out a map on our kitchen table. She'd spent all night taking readings around the ranger station, measuring the more electrical residue the creature had left behind. "Everything we've seen points to the high peaks. That's where it must be living." Shook my head. "It's too dangerous. You saw what it did to that elk." "That's exactly why we need to study it," she insisted, her eyes bright with excitement. "David, think about it. A creature that can control electricity, create storms. We need to understand it." I knew that look in her eyes. It was the same look she got when she was tracking mountain lions or studying bear behavior. Once Maria set her mind on something, there was no stopping her. So we started climbing. The weather got stranger the higher we went. One minute it would be sunny. The next we'd be in the middle of a storm that appeared from nowhere. Our equipment kept failing. Compasses spinning in circles, GPS devices showing impossible locations. After 3 hours of climbing, we found the first bone pile. Hundreds of bones bleached white by the sun scattered across a high ledge. Some were from elk and deer, but others were from animals I didn't recognize. Animals that looked too big to exist. "These marks," Maria said, examining a massive skull. "They're electrical burns. The creature must use lightning to cook its food." Thunder rolled across the mountains, but the sky was still clear. "We should go back," I said, my hands starting to shake. "Maria, please. Something doesn't feel right." She was about to argue when we heard it. That deep thundering sound we now knew wasn't thunder at all. Maria grabbed her research equipment, but I caught her arm. "Don't," I whispered. "The metal will attract it." Too late. The air filled with electricity. Every hair on my body stood on end. Maria's research equipment started to spark and smoke. In her hands, the Thunderbird appeared from behind a cloud bigger than ever. Its metallic feathers flashed in the sunlight as it dove straight toward us. Toward Maria. I tried to reach her, but a bolt of lightning struck between us. By the time I could see again, the creature had Maria in its claws. She screamed my name as it carried her higher and higher into the sky. "Maria!" I screamed, but my voice was lost in the sudden storm that wrapped around the mountain peak. I watched helplessly as the Thunderbird carried my wife toward the highest peaks, disappearing into the clouds. The storm it had created raged around me, lightning striking. So close I could feel the heat on my face. For a moment I stood frozen, my old fear of lightning threatening to paralyze me completely. But this was Maria, my Maria, and she needed me. I looked up at the storm-wrapped peak where the creature had taken her. I was a climber, one of the best. If anyone could reach those heights in a storm, it was me. But as I checked my climbing gear, I realized with horror that most of it was metal. The ropes and harness would be safe, but any metal equipment would just attract the creature's lightning. I had to make a choice. Try to climb with minimal gear and risk falling, or use my metal. equipment and risk attracting the creature's attention. Either way, I knew this climb might be my last. But I had to try. I had to save Maria. What I didn't know then was that I was about to face my worst fears, high above the earth, in the middle of the biggest storm I'd ever seen. The climb was the hardest thing I'd ever done. Lightning flashed all around me as I made my way up the cliff face, using only my rope, harness, and plastic gear. Each time I looked down, the ground disappeared into storm clouds below. My hands were bleeding from gripping the sharp rocks, but I couldn't stop. Maria needed me. I finally reached a wide ledge near the peak. There, built into the side of the mountain, was the creature's nest. It was huge, like a house made of twisted metal and bones. The air crackled with electricity, making my skin tingle and my hair stand on end. "Maria!" I called out, fighting against the howling wind. "Maria, where are you?" a weak voice answered from inside the nest. "David, don't... It's coming." I scrambled into the nest and found her lying there, barely conscious. Her clothes were scorched, but she was alive. Thank God she was alive. That's when I heard it, the deep rolling thunder that meant the creature was returning. I tried to help Maria up, but she could barely move. "You have to go," she whispered. "The metal, in my equipment, it's drawing it here." The Thunderbird landed at the nest entrance, its massive form blocking out what little light made it through the storm clouds. Its eyes glowed like blue fire as it looked at us, electricity crackling between its metallic feathers. I had a crazy idea, a terrible, crazy idea. "Hold on to the rope," I told Maria, tying it securely around her waist. The other end was already attached to my harness. Then I did the one thing every climbing instructor had always said never to do. I pulled out the long metal pole from my backpack that I used for emergency radio antenna. The Thunderbird's eyes locked onto it immediately. "Hey!" I shouted, waving the pole. "You want this? Come get it!" the creature screeched, a sound like tearing metal mixed with thunder. It lunged at me, exactly as I'd hoped. I dove to the side, letting it crash past me toward the metal pole. But I hadn't counted on Maria. Trying to help, she grabbed my arm, trying to pull me back, and suddenly we were both tumbling toward the edge of the nest. The creature's wing caught us, sending us over the side. We fell. The rope between us went tight. Maria screamed. I managed to grab a rock, outcropping with my free hand, but I could feel my grip slipping on the wet stone. Above us, the Thunderbird was charging up for a lightning strike. That's when Maria looked up at me. Even through the rain and wind, I could see the decision in her eyes. "I love you," she said. Then she pulled out her knife and cut the rope. "No!" I screamed, but it was too late. She was falling, disappearing into the storm clouds below. The last thing I saw was her small smile, like she was trying to tell me it was okay. The Thunderbird dove past me after her, its wings creating a thunderclap that almost made me lose my grip. Lightning flashed, turning everything white. When my vision cleared, both Maria and the creature were gone. Only the storm remained, crying with me on that mountain. They found Maria's body 3 days later in a deep ravine miles from the mountain. The official report said she died in a climbing accident. A tragic mishap during a storm, they called it. Simple as that. I tried to tell them the truth about the creature, about what really happened, but they didn't believe me, or maybe they didn't want to believe me. The rangers found the nest empty, with no sign of the massive bones or metallic feathers we'd discovered. It was like the Thunderbird had never existed. Men in dark suits came to the ranger station. They packed up all of Maria's research, took all our photos and equipment. They told me it would be better if I didn't talk about what happened. Better. For everyone, they said. But they couldn't hide everything. Every year, when the storms come to Mount Baker, Snoqualmie, strange things still happen. Hikers report seeing massive shadows in the clouds. Animals disappear. Equipment fails for no reason. And sometimes, on the darkest nights, that deep thunder that isn't really thunder rolls across the mountains. I left the Forest Service after that. I couldn't stay. Couldn't keep looking at those peaks knowing what lived up there. Knowing what I'd lost. These days I can barely stand to be outside during a storm. The sound of thunder makes my hands shake so bad I can't hold a camera anymore. Sometimes I dream about that day. In my dreams, I'm back on that mountain, watching Maria fall. But in the dreams, I see something I missed before. Just before she disappeared into the clouds, the Thunderbird changed its dive. Instead of striking, it seemed to curve under her like it was trying to catch her. I'll never know if that really happened or if my mind made it up to help me cope. Just like I'll never know if Maria cut that rope to save me, or if she did it because she knew something about the creature that I didn't. She'd spent so much time studying it, reading those old tribal stories. Maybe she understood something. I still don't. The tribal elders say the Thunderbird isn't evil. It's just ancient from a time when the world was different. They say it's a guardian of sorts, keeping balance in its own way. Maybe they're right. I've never gone back to those mountains. But sometimes, when storms gather over the peaks and that special kind of thunder rolls down the valleys, I think about Maria, about her excitement when we first found those feathers, her passion for understanding this impossible thing we'd discovered, and I wonder if she found the answers she was looking for in those last moments falling through the storm. I hope she did. I hope she finally understood the mystery she gave her life trying to solve. As for me, I've learned to live with my questions and with my fears. But there's one thing I know for sure. Somewhere up there, among the highest peaks where the storms gather, something ancient still flies. Something that reminds us that the world is bigger and stranger than we think. And when the thunder rolls, I listen, just in case it's trying to tell us something we've forgotten how to hear. I've worked in the Ozark National Forest for 30 years, and I've seen some strange things, but nothing like what happened last spring. Nothing that made me question my own sanity. I should have retired last year when I had the chance. Maybe then I'd still be able to see my kids instead of sitting here in this white room writing this all down. My name is Bill Foster. I'm 52 years old, and until 6 months ago I was a park ranger. I was also doing pretty well. 3 years. Sober, keeping busy with my hobby of studying plants, and slowly getting my life back together after losing Sarah, my wife, to cancer. It all started on a foggy Tuesday morning in April. I was doing my usual patrol, checking on the campgrounds after some hikers reported strange noises the night before. The air was damp and heavy and something felt off. You know that feeling when you walk into a room and know someone's been there even though nothing's obviously wrong? It was like that. I found the campsite at around 8 a.m. Everything was perfectly arranged. The tent was still standing, sleeping bags were laid out neatly inside, and clothes were folded in precise piles near the entrance. A pot of half-cooked soup sat on the cold fire pit. 2 pairs of hiking boots were placed side by side, as if their owners had just stepped out of them. But there was no one there. No footprints leading away. No signs of struggle. What caught my eye was the moss. I'd never seen anything like it before. And remember, I'm something of a plant nerd. This moss was forming perfect geometric patterns on the ground. Circles, triangles, and shapes that seemed almost deliberate. When I crouched down to take a closer look, I swear I saw it move. Just slightly, like a carpet rippling in a breeze. But there wasn't any wind. I took out my camera to document everything. I must have taken 30 photos of the campsite and that strange moss. But when I developed the film later that day, every single shot was ruined. Just blank, dark frames, as if something had absorbed all the light. That evening, I sat in my cabin staring at those empty photos. I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd seen something I wasn't supposed to see, something that didn't want to be recorded. I called my friend Mike, another ranger who'd been working these forests even longer than me. His voice sounded strange on the phone, distant somehow. "Just leave it alone, Bill," he said. "Some things in these woods, they're better left undisturbed." I should have listened to him, should have noticed how odd he sounded. But I'd spent my whole career solving problems, helping people, and somewhere in these forests there were 2 missing hikers who needed help. I didn't know then that I was about to stumble into something that would destroy everything I thought I knew about nature, about reality itself. Something that had been growing, spreading, waiting in these woods for a very long time, and it had already started reaching out for me. Over the next few weeks, things got worse. A lot worse. More people started going missing. First, it was just 2 more hikers, then a family of 4 who'd been camping near Oak Creek. Each time it was the same story. Their belongings left behind, perfectly arranged, and that strange moss growing nearby. I kept seeing Mike around the forest, but something wasn't right with him. He wouldn't look me in the eye anymore. Once I caught him standing perfectly still by the lake for hours, just staring at the water. When I called out to him, he turned so slowly it made my skin crawl. "Beautiful patterns," he said, pointing at the water's edge. That's when I noticed it. The moss was spreading along the shoreline, making those same geometric shapes I'd seen at the first campsite. Perfect circles and triangles that no natural growth could make. I started marking these spots on my map. They were always near water. Creeks, springs, the lake. But around each patch of moss, nothing else would grow. The grass would turn brown and die, leaving perfect circles of dead plants. Even the trees started looking sick, their leaves falling off even though it was spring. One morning I found a dead deer. It wasn't like any animal death I'd seen before, and I'd seen plenty in my years as a ranger. The deer was covered in that same moss, but it followed the lines of the deer's muscles, like it was trying to copy them. I took pictures, but just like before, they came out blank. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Mike's strange behavior, about all those missing people. I got up and pulled out my old case files, searching for anything similar. What I found made my hands shake. In 1932, 8 people had vanished in these same woods. The report described empty campsites, strange moss growths, and a ranger who exhibited unusual behavior before disappearing himself. The case was never solved. I was so wrapped up in reading that I almost missed the sound outside my cabin. A soft, sliding noise, like something dragging itself across my porch. When I looked out the window, I saw it. A patch of moss moving by itself, flowing like water across the wooden boards. I backed away from the window, my heart pounding. For the first time in 3 years, I wanted a drink. Really wanted one. My hands were shaking as I picked up the phone to call for backup, but when the voice answered, it was Mike. "Come to the forest, Bill," he said. His voice didn't sound human. More. "The patterns, they're so beautiful, you need to see them up close." I hung up and sat in my dark cabin, listening to the sounds outside. Something was changing in my forest. Something was spreading. And I had a terrible feeling that Mike wasn't Mike anymore. I just didn't know how right I was. I'll never forget what I saw the next morning. I was walking along Pine Creek checking the spots I'd marked on my map when I heard a strange squelching sound, like someone stepping in wet mud, over and over. Through the trees, I saw a young deer drinking from the creek. Everything seemed normal at first, but then I noticed the water. The moss was creeping toward the deer's hooves, moving like spilled paint across the ground. The deer didn't even notice. I wanted to shout, to scare it away, but my voice stuck, my throat. I could only watch. The moss touched the deer's leg, and it happened so fast, like watching a wave wash over someone at the beach, except this wave was green and glowing. The deer tried to jump away, but the moss was already climbing up its legs, covering its body. The worst part was how quiet it was. The deer didn't make a sound as the moss swallowed it whole. Then something happened that made me question everything I knew about nature. The moss-covered shape of the deer started to move. Not like a deer stumbling or falling. It moved like clay being molded by invisible hands. The moss shifted and changed until it looked exactly like the deer had, except it was made entirely of that glowing green stuff. Beautiful, isn't it? I jumped at the voice behind me. It was Mike, but not Mike. His skin had a greenish tint, and patterns like the ones I'd seen in the moss were moving under his face. "The forest has been waiting for so long," he said, taking a step toward me. "It wants to share its patterns with everyone. Let me show you, Bill." He reached out, and I saw moss growing between his fingers, spreading across his palm like a living glove. That's when I ran. I ran faster than I ever had in my life, crashing through branches and jumping over logs. Behind me, I heard something, moving through the trees. Not footsteps, but a sound like rushing water. I looked back once. Mike wasn't running. His body was flowing across the ground like a river of moss, following me. When I finally made it to my truck, my hands were shaking. So bad I could barely get the key in. As I drove away, I looked in my mirror and saw Mike standing at the forest's edge. He wasn't alone. Shapes made of glowing moss stood beside him, shapes that looked like people, like all the missing hikers. That's when I realized the horrible truth. The forest floor, all of it, was connected. Every patch of moss was part of one giant thing, and it was spreading. I drove straight to the ranger station, my mind racing. Who would believe me? How could I explain what I'd seen? And worse, how many more people had the moss already taken? I knew one thing for sure. I needed a drink. After 3 years of staying sober, I pulled into the liquor store parking lot. My hands were still shaking as I walked inside. I told myself, it was just to steady my nerves just this once. I didn't know then that this was exactly what it wanted, for me to be alone, confused, and with no one to trust. The moss wasn't just taking over the forest, it was taking over everything, one person at a time, and I was the only one who knew the truth. That first drink led to another, and another. By the time I tried to tell people what was happening, no one would listen. They just saw a drunk ranger with crazy stories about moving moss. Foster's lost it, they'd whisper when I walked into the town diner. Poor guy hasn't been right since his wife died, but I knew what I'd seen. And things were getting worse every day. The moss started appearing in town, first in people's gardens, then in the park. I'd see it growing in perfect shapes between the sidewalk cracks. When I tried to warn people, they'd just rake it away or spray it with weed killer. But it always came back. Then Mike started bringing people into the forest. He'd tell them about a beautiful spot he'd found, or a hidden waterfall. They'd follow him in, excited for an adventure. But they wouldn't come back out. One morning I woke up to find moss growing on my cabin walls. Perfect circles and triangles glowing softly in the dawn light. I packed my truck and moved into the Cherry Hill Motel on the edge of town. But I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those patterns. My kids tried to help. Jenny and Tom drove up from Little Rock after they heard about my episodes. They wanted me to see a doctor to get help. Dad, you're not making any sense, Jenny said, tears in her eyes. First Mom, and now. You can't keep doing this to yourself. I tried to explain to make them understand, but when I looked at Tom's face, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A slight green tint under his skin, geometric patterns moving across his neck. You should come see the forest, Dad, he said in a voice that wasn't quite his anymore. The patterns, they're so beautiful. I ran from the motel room. Behind me I heard Jenny screaming my name, but it wasn't safe anymore. Nowhere was safe. That night, I sat in my truck with a bottle of whiskey, watching the forest through my binoculars. The moss was glowing brighter than ever, pulsing like a heartbeat. And people, dozens of them, were walking into the trees. Their movements were strange, flowing like water, like they weren't really people anymore. I knew what I had to do. The moss had taken my friend, my son, and soon it would take the whole town. There was only one way to stop it. I had 20 gallons of gasoline in the back of my truck, and a box of matches in my pocket. The forest had been dry lately. One good fire would burn it all away. I didn't know then that I was playing right into its hands. That everything, the drinking, the isolation, my own desperation, was exactly what it wanted. The moss wasn't just spreading anymore. It was thinking, planning, waiting, and I was about to walk right into its trap. The night was unusually quiet as I drove into the forest. No crickets chirping, no owls hooting, just silence. I parked my truck near the first campsite where it all began and started unloading the gas cans. The moss was everywhere now, glowing like tiny green stars on the ground. As I walked deeper into the woods, I could see it moving, reaching out toward my feet. I kept moving, splashing gasoline in wide circles around the trees. "Dad, stop." I turned around. Tom was standing there, but he wasn't Tom anymore. His skin was almost transparent with green patterns swirling underneath. Behind him stood Mike, and behind Mike were shapes, dozens of them, all made of glowing moss, all shaped like people. "It doesn't have to hurt," Tom said, his voice rippling like water. "The patterns, they make everything clear. Everything. Beautiful." The moss was creeping closer, forming those perfect geometric shapes around my boots. I struck a match. "I'm sorry, son," I whispered and dropped it. The fire caught faster than I expected. Flames raced along the gasoline trails, lighting up the night. The moss people screamed, not like humans, but like wind through trees. They tried to run, but the fire was everywhere. I watched as the thing wearing Tom's face melted back into moss, the patterns breaking apart in the heat. Mike reached for me, his arms stretching like green taffy, but the flames caught him too. That's when I realized my mistake. The fire was spreading too fast, cutting off my path back to the truck. Smoke filled the air, thick and green. The moss wasn't just burning, it was releasing something into the air. I tried to run, but the ground under my feet started moving. The moss was everywhere, trying one last time to catch me. I fell, and for a moment I felt it start to creep over my skin. Felt the cold, wet feeling of it trying to change me. Then everything went black. I woke up in the hospital, handcuffed, to the bed. They said I'd started the biggest forest fire in Ozark history. Said I was raving about living moss and people made of plants. Nobody believed me. Why would they? All they found were burned trees and normal dead moss. That was 6 months ago. Now I'm here in the mental hospital, writing it all down. My daughter Jenny doesn't visit anymore. She can't look at me after what happened to Tom. They never found his body, or any bodies, just empty clothes, arranged in perfect patterns on the forest floor. But here's the thing. Yesterday, I saw something on the wall of my room. A tiny patch of green, growing in perfect geometric shapes. Sometimes, late at night, I think I see it move. And my new roommate, he keeps talking about patterns, about how beautiful they are. The forest fire didn't stop it. The moss is patient. It can wait. It's been waiting for a long time. It's growing right now, spreading through cracks in the walls, under doors, through water pipes, moving like a slow green tide across the country. And no one will believe the crazy old man who tried to warn them. No one will believe me until it's too late, until the patterns come for them too. The singing started on our 3rd night in the caves. I was the only one who thought it was strange that none of my teammates seemed worried about it. But then again, I was used to being the careful one. 15 years of being a Marine teaches you that the smallest details can mean the difference between life and death. My name is Richard Martinez, and I've spent the last 5 years exploring caves all across Texas. But nothing could have prepared me for what we found in the Guadalupe Mountains. It began when Tom, our junior researcher, reported hearing weird echoes coming from a narrow crack in the cave wall. We were supposed to be mapping the known parts of the system, but something about those sounds made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. It reminded me of the desert nights in Iraq, that eerie calm before all hell broke loose. "We should check it out," Sarah said, already pulling out her rope. The others nodded eagerly, but I noticed their eyes looked weirdly unfocused. Maybe it was just the poor lighting from our headlamps, but something felt off. The crack was barely wide enough for us to squeeze through sideways. As we pushed deeper, our lights revealed something that made us all stop in our tracks. The walls were covered in ancient paintings, hundreds of them. But these weren't the usual hunting scenes we sometimes found. These showed something different. A massive white shape with no eyes and tiny human figures walking toward it like they were in some kind of trance. "Look at the warning symbols," I said, pointing to the red X marks painted over and over. The Native Americans were trying to tell us to stay away. But my team wasn't listening anymore. They were staring at a dark tunnel that seemed to appear out of nowhere. The air coming from it was cold, too cold, and it carried a sound I can only describe as beautiful and terrifying at the same time. like 1,000 whispers mixed with the saddest song you've ever heard. I checked my GPS unit to mark our location, but the screen was dead. So was my backup. All our equipment was failing, one piece at a time. We should head back, I said firmly, falling back on my military training. Report this and return with better gear. That's when I noticed Mike walking toward the tunnel, his movements stiff like a sleepwalker. Sarah and Tom followed, their headlamps creating dancing shadows on the walls. They didn't respond when I called their names. I grabbed Mike's arm, but he shrugged me off without even looking at me. The singing got louder, and I felt a strange pull in my mind, like something was trying to make me follow them. But the sensation triggered my old war reflexes, the same ones that kept me alive during firefights. My mind automatically fought against the influence, just like it fought against the panic during Desert Storm. Standing there in the darkness, watching my friends march deeper into the unknown, I realized we'd stumbled onto something that wasn't supposed to be found. And somehow, I knew this was only the beginning of our nightmare. I managed to get my team back to base camp that first night, but things only got stranger after that. Nobody remembered walking into the tunnel. When I tried to bring it up, they just looked at me with blank expressions like I was speaking a different language. That night, I couldn't sleep. The singing was fainter now, but it was still there, like a lullaby being hummed from far away. I kept watch and saw something that made my stomach turn. One by one, my teammates got up from their sleeping bags. Their eyes were closed, but they moved with purpose, trying to head back toward that tunnel. I stopped them, of course, grabbed each one and shook them awake. They were confused and scared when they realized they were standing instead of sleeping. Sarah started crying when I told her this was the third time I'd had to wake her up. The next morning, I radioed for help, but all I got was static. Our satellite phone was dead too, even though we'd charged all the batteries the day before. Something in these caves was messing with our equipment, and I had a feeling it wasn't just bad luck. I decided to learn more about the cave's history. In my pack, I had a book about local Native American legends that I always carried on expeditions. What I found made my blood run cold. The local tribes called this place the Den of the White Devil. They wrote about a creature that sang to people, leading them deep underground where they were never seen again. It's just a story, Tom said when I showed him. But his hands were shaking. The worst part was the sound of machinery breaking down. First, our backup generator died. Then our main lights started flickering. Every night, the haunting melody got louder, more beautiful, more tempting. I caught myself humming it once and bit my tongue until I tasted blood to make myself stop. I tried to keep everyone busy during the day, hoping it would help them sleep better at night. But I could see them changing. Their movements got slower, dreamlike. They'd stop in the middle of tasks and stare into space, swaying slightly like they were listening to music only they could hear. Mike was the first to start talking in his sleep. "It's so beautiful," he'd whisper. "It's calling us home." When he was awake, he couldn't remember saying anything. I found Sarah one morning tracing the cave paintings with her fingers, adding to them with our mapping chalk. She'd drawn the same thing over and over, a massive white shape with no eyes. When I asked her about it later, she had no memory of doing it. The final straw came when our last working flashlight showed us something in one of the deeper caves. Hundreds of old backpacks, climbing gear, and camping supplies. Some looked decades old, others seemed more recent. All of them were covered in a thick layer of dust. I recognized one of the newer bags. It belonged to a group of hikers who had gone missing last summer. The local police had searched for weeks but never found a trace of them. That's when I knew we weren't dealing with just some strange cave phenomenon or group hallucination. Something was hunting us. Something that had been hunting people in these caves for a very long time. And it was getting hungrier. The creature showed itself on our 5th day in the caves. We were mapping a new tunnel system when our last working light started to flicker. I reached for my backup flashlight, but before I could turn it on, something else lit up the cave. It started as a soft blue glow like moonlight on water. Beautiful but wrong, so wrong. The light seemed to pulse in time with that haunting song that had been following us for days. "Look," Sarah whispered. Her voice sounded dreamy, far away. "Isn't it lovely?" That's when I saw it. The creature was massive, at least 20 feet long, its body smooth and white like a giant albino snake. But this was no snake. Its skin was almost see-through, and I could make out organs pulsing inside its body. Where its eyes should have been, there was just smooth, pale flesh. The blue light was coming from its skin, rippling along its length like waves. The song grew louder, and I watched in horror as my teammates started walking toward it, their arms outstretched like children reaching for a toy. "Stop!" I tried to grab them, but they pushed past me. My heart was pounding so hard it hurt. The scene triggered memories of the war, the sound of bombs, the screams of my fellow Marines. My old combat instincts kicked in, and suddenly the creature's song seemed to hit a wall in my mind. That's when I realized why I was different. My PTSD, the thing that had haunted me for years, was actually protecting me. My brain was so used to fighting against fear and panic that it could resist the creature's power, but the others weren't so lucky. They walked closer and closer to the glowing monster. I saw its mouth open, a huge dark hole lined with rows of teeth like needles. "Mike, Sarah, Tom!" I screamed their names, but they kept walking. The creature's light got brighter, and its song became so beautiful it almost broke through my resistance. Almost. I followed them deeper into the cave, trying to pull them back. That's when my flashlight beam hit something that made me gag. Bones. Hundreds of bones scattered across the cave floor, mixed with shreds of old clothing and camping gear. This was its feeding chamber. All those missing hikers, all those unexplained disappearances over the years. This is where they ended up. The creature's body started to coil around my teammates. I had to do something. I grabbed a rock and threw it as hard as I could at the monster's side. The rock passed right through its translucent flesh, but it was enough to make it angry. It turned toward me, its song changing to something harsh and sharp. The sound hit me like a physical wave, making my nose bleed. But I stood my ground. I had to. I was the only one who could. My team was still walking forward, right toward those terrible teeth. I had only seconds to save them, but I was just one person against something that had been hunting in these caves for who knows how long. And then I remembered something from my Marine training that might just save all our lives, if I could get to my pack in time. I managed to save my team that day by setting off an emergency flare. The bright light and loud noise confused the creature long enough for me to drag everyone to safety. But I knew it wasn't over. My teammates had no memory of what happened. They were weak and confused, like people waking up from a deep sleep. I got them back to our camp and radioed for emergency help using Mike's old military radio, the only piece of equipment still working. Help arrived the next morning, a rescue team of 6 people led by Park Ranger Johnson. I tried to warn them about the creature, tried to explain about the singing and the hypnotic powers. But when I described the massive white shape with no eyes, they looked at me like I was crazy. "You've been in the caves too long," Johnson said kindly. "Let's get your team out and then we'll do a proper search." But I couldn't leave. Not when I knew what was waiting in those tunnels. Not when I knew the rescue team was walking into a trap. "At least wear these," I said, handing out earplugs from my emergency kit. Trust me, they took them to humor me, but I could tell they weren't going to use them. They thought I was suffering from cave fever, seeing things that weren't there, if only they knew. "See?" Johnson said. "Nothing here but rocks," and that's when the singing started. I'll never forget what happened next. One by one, the rescue team members stopped moving. Their flashlights dropped to the ground. Their eyes went glassy and blank. Even Johnson, who was built like a football player and had 20 years of cave rescue experience, started swaying to that terrible melody. "Put in your earplugs," I screamed. "Now!" But they couldn't hear me anymore. The song was too beautiful, too powerful. I watched in horror as they started walking deeper into the cave, just like my team had done. I tried to stop them, but there were too many. They pushed past me like I wasn't even there. The The singing got louder and the blue light appeared again, turning the cave walls into rippling water. Then I saw it again, the creature. But this time it was bigger, its transparent skin glowing brighter than before. It must have been hungry, after missing its meal the day before. The rescue team walked straight toward it, smiling like they were going to meet an old friend. I pulled at their arms, tried to tackle them, even punched Johnson in the face, but nothing worked. They kept walking. The creature's mouth opened wide, wider than before. I had to watch, helpless, as the rescue team walked right into those needle-like teeth. There was no blood, no screaming. He disappeared, one after another, like they were walking through a doorway. Only this doorway led to somewhere nobody ever came back from. I ran. For the first time since my days in Desert Storm, I ran away from a fight, but I wasn't giving up. I was going to get help, real help. And I knew exactly what we would need to fight this thing. I just hoped I could convince someone to believe me before the creature got hungry again. 3 days later, I went back to the caves. This time I was ready, or at least I thought I was. I had special noise-canceling headphones, the kind they use at shooting ranges. I also brought my old service pistol. I didn't think bullets would hurt the creature, but I had another plan. The caves were quieter than before. Maybe too quiet. I made my way down to the tunnel where I'd last seen the rescue team disappear. My powerful flashlight beam showed fresh, boot prints in the dust. They must have belonged to the rescue team. Then I heard it, that beautiful, terrible song. Even through my headphones, I could feel it trying to get into my head. The creature knew I was back. The blue light appeared, stronger than ever. My headphones started crackling with static, and then they died completely. Just like everything else electronic in these caves. The song hit me full force, and I felt my legs trying to walk forward on their own. But I was ready this time. I pulled out my gun, pointed it right next to my head, and pulled the trigger. The gunshot was deafening in the enclosed cave. Pain exploded in my ears as my eardrums burst. The world went silent, completely silent. For the first time since we'd found these tunnels, I couldn't hear the song. The creature didn't like that. I could see it thrashing around, its mouth opening and closing. It must have been making that awful sound, but I couldn't hear it anymore. Without its song, it couldn't control me. I smiled at the monster and pulled out my last emergency flare. The creature's skin was almost transparent, which meant it probably couldn't handle bright light. I lit the flare and threw it right at the thing's body. The cave lit up like daytime. Through my blurry vision, I saw the creature writhing in pain. It slithered away into a crack in the wall, a crack too small for any human to follow. I wanted to go after it, to find some way to stop it for good, but I could barely stand. Blood was running from my ears and the cave walls seemed to spin around me. I stumbled my way back to the entrance and found a rescue team waiting. A real one this time, called by the park rangers when they lost radio contact with the first team. They found me passed out at the cave entrance. The doctors later told me I'd never hear again. The gunshot had destroyed my hearing completely. But I didn't care. Being deaf was better than being the creature's dinner. The cave system was sealed off after that. The official story was that it was too dangerous, that the tunnels were unstable. They put up warning signs and metal barriers, but every now and then, hikers report hearing strange, beautiful music coming from behind those barriers. I work as a cave safety instructor now. I can't hear my own voice anymore, but I can still talk. I teach people about the dangers of caves, the normal dangers like loose rocks and flash floods. But sometimes when I meet other cavers, I write them a note. If you're ever deep underground and hear singing, stuff your ears with whatever you can find and run. Run as fast as you can, because some things that live in the dark don't just want to kill you, they want to keep you forever. The creature is still down there. I know it is. Waiting in the darkness, singing its beautiful song, hungry for its next meal. And the scariest part, those caves aren't the only deep, dark places in this world. Sometimes at night, even though I can't hear anything anymore, I still feel that song in my dreams. And I wonder how many other caves, how many other dark places have their own White devils, singing their own deadly songs, waiting for someone to wander just a little too deep into the dark. I never thought darkness could be hungry, but here in Alaska, during the longest night of the year, I learned that some shadows don't just sit still, they hunt. My name is Daniel Walker, and I'm the winter caretaker of Denali National Park. Most people think I'm crazy for staying here alone when the sun barely shows its face, and temperatures drop lower than a freezer. But after 20 years of flying bush planes through these mountains, this place feels more like home than anywhere. That night started like any other winter evening. I was in my warm lodge drinking hot coffee and watching the stars through my telescope. The green and purple lights of the aurora danced across the sky, something I'd seen 1,000 times before. But then something changed. First, it was just a small patch of sky where the stars began to vanish. Not behind clouds, they just disappeared, like someone was erasing them with a giant invisible eraser. I rubbed my eyes, thinking they were playing tricks on me. But when I looked again, an even bigger section of stars had gone dark. I grabbed my radio to call the nearest station. "This is Walker at Denali Lodge. Anyone copying?" Only static answered. Tried again, and that's when I heard it. A strange language crackling through the speaker like whispers made of ice. The thermometer outside my window caught my eye. The red line was dropping faster than I'd ever seen it fall. -40, -50, -60. That's when my coffee mug started to frost over in my hands. My brother Tom died in these mountains 10 years ago, buried in an avalanche while we were flying together. He always said the mountains held secrets we couldn't understand. As I stood, there watching my breath turn to ice crystals in the air, I realized Tom might have been right. Something was coming, something that made the darkness feel alive. And for the first time since I started this job, I wished I wasn't alone in the heart of Alaska during the longest night of the year. The next few days felt wrong. The sun, which usually peaked above the mountains for a few hours even in winter, started showing up late and leaving early. At first, I thought maybe my clock was broken. But no, something else was happening. I've lived in Alaska long enough to know its moods, but this was different. The animals knew it too. One morning, I watched a whole herd of caribou race past my lodge, running south like their lives depended on it. Even the ravens, which stay here through the worst winters, were gone. While checking my backup generator, you don't survive here without backups, I found strange frost patterns on the walls. Not the usual kind that spreads like ferns across windows. These looked like handprints, but much bigger than any humans. They appeared overnight, even on the inside walls where frost never forms. I tried calling Jake, an old Inuit friend who'd taught me about the land's ancient stories. The phone line crackled, and I could barely hear him through the static. "Daniel," his voice was serious. "My grandmother used to warn us about the time of the Great Dark, when the shadows—" The line went dead. I tried calling back, but now, all the phones were down. Next went the internet, then my backup radio. One by one, every way I had of reaching the outside world stopped working. It felt like something was cutting me off, like a spider trapping a fly in its web. I dug through my old books, ones Jake had given me about Inuit legends. There was a story about a creature born from the darkest night of winter, something that ate heat and light. I used to think these were just tales to scare kids into coming home before dark. Now, watching another patch of stars vanish above my lodge, I wasn't so sure. The thermometer kept dropping lower than ever recorded in Denali's history. I had to wear my heaviest winter gear even inside the lodge. My breath froze in the air before it could rise to the ceiling, falling to the floor in tiny ice crystals. Then came the blizzard. But as I watched through my frost-covered windows, I saw something that made my heart stop. In the swirling snow, darker shapes moved against the whiteness. Not like animals or trees swaying. These shadows moved with purpose, like they were searching for something or someone. I loaded my emergency flare gun and checked all my flashlights. If the legends were true, if what was out there really fed on heat and light, I needed to be ready. Because the way those shadows moved, I knew they'd find their way to my lodge soon. and the sun wouldn't rise again for a very long time. It happened during what should have been sunset. The aurora lights were twisting in the sky like green and purple snakes, but something was off about them. Instead of dancing, they seemed to be running away from something. I was double-checking my supplies when all 6 of my flashlights turned on by themselves. They weren't just on. They were shining brighter than I'd ever seen, like they were trying to fight something off. Then, one by one, they went dark. Not like batteries dying, but like their light was being eaten. The fire in my wood stove, which had been burning strong all day, suddenly went blue, then white, then vanished. The logs weren't even smoking anymore. They were covered in frost, like they'd never been hot at all. My hands shook as I watched the thermometer drop. -70, -80. The needle went lower than it could measure. The cold wasn't just around me anymore. It was inside the lodge, turning the air so frozen it hurt to breathe. That's when I saw it. At first I thought it was just another shadow on the wall. But shadows don't move when nothing's casting them. Shadows don't stand up like people, and shadows definitely don't turn to look at you with eyes that seem to swallow light. It was human-shaped, but that's where humans stopped. It was like someone had cut a person-sized hole in the world, and through that hole was nothing but absolute darkness. Frost spread across the floor and walls wherever it moved, crackling like tiny breaking bones. I couldn't run. My legs felt frozen in place. Time seemed to slow down, like the air had turned to syrup. The thing glided toward me, and I felt the warmth being pulled out of my body like it was drinking my heat through an invisible straw. My pilot training kicked in. When you're in trouble in the air, you don't panic. You think. I remembered the flare gun in my pocket. With fingers that felt like ice, I grabbed it and pulled the trigger. The red flare shot straight through the creature. For a split second, I saw inside it, a swirling void of endless black. The flare hit the wall behind it and fizzled out, instantly, like it had been dunked in Arctic water. The shadow being made a sound then, like wind howling through a frozen cave. It reached for me with hands made of darkness, and I felt the last bit of warmth in my chest start to fade. Just when I thought it was over, the emergency generator kicked on outside with a roar. All the lights in the lodge blazed to life at once. The creature jerked back, its form rippling like disturbed water. It slid through the wall and disappeared, leaving behind a trail of ice crystals that glowed in the sudden light. I stood there, shaking, staring at the frost-covered wall where it had vanished. The generator had saved me, but I knew 2 things. For certain, that thing would be back, and next time, lights alone wouldn't be enough to stop it. The sound of airplane engines the next morning was the sweetest thing I'd ever heard. Through the swirling snow, I saw a small bush plane circling the lodge. My old friend Mike had come looking for me after all the failed radio calls. I ran outside, waving my arms. The plane landed smoothly on the packed snow, and Mike jumped out, his breath clouding in the freezing air. "Walker, what's going on up here? Nobody's heard from you in days, and the weather readings are crazy." He looked around at the unnaturally dark sky. "It's noon, but it looks like midnight." I started to explain, but then I saw it, a shadow sliding across the snow behind Mike's plane. "Inside, now!" We barely made it through the door when the temperature plummeted again. Mike's eyes went wide as frost crawled up the windows like living vines. "What in the world?" "They feed on heat," I said, pulling him away from the walls. "Everything warm, fire, electricity, even body heat. The colder it gets, the stronger they become." Mike's plane suddenly made a grinding sound outside. Through the window, we watched in horror as ice spread across its engines. The metal cracked in the intense cold, and the wings drooped like melting wax. Our only way out was destroyed in seconds. The shadows started seeping through the walls like black water. Not just one this time. 3 of them. Their dark forms rippled as they moved, leaving trails of ice behind them. The lights flickered and died, and our breath turned to snow in the air. "The utility room," I said, pulling Mike along. "I think I know what they want." We huddled in the small room next to the generator, which was still fighting to stay alive. Every time the shadows got close to it, they seemed to grow stronger, drinking in its heat. They're not just feeding, I realized, watching them. They're storing energy, getting stronger. But why? Mike's teeth were chattering. Dan, I can't feel my legs. Frost was forming on his jacket, spreading faster than it should. One of the shadow creatures had noticed him and was gliding closer, drawn to his body heat. I grabbed a handful of emergency hand warmers from my supply shelf and activated them. The shadows turned toward the sudden heat like sharks smelling blood. They're like predators, Mike whispered, his lips turning blue. Everything alive is food to them. And out here in the endless night, they could feed forever, I finished, unless we find a way to stop them. The generator gave one final groan and died. In the sudden darkness, the shadow beings seemed to grow larger, their empty eyes fixed on us. Mike clutched my arm, his skin feeling like ice. The magnesium flares, he said through chattering teeth. In my plane's emergency kit, they burn hot enough to... A shadow creature slid between us and Mike's voice turned into a gasp of pain. I could feel him growing colder beside me, and I knew we were running out of time. I had to get to those flares. But with 3 shadow beings between us and the plane, and Mike freezing faster by the second, I wasn't sure we'd both make it out alive. I had to choose, stay with Mike or run for the flares. Before I could decide, Mike pushed me toward the door with his freezing hands. Go, he said, his voice barely a whisper. I'll distract them. Mike pulled out his lighter and clicked it on. The tiny flame drew the shadows like moths, giving me a chance to run. I heard him shout behind me as I sprinted through the darkness, but I couldn't look back. The cold hit me like a wall when I got outside. The plane was covered in ice, but I knew where the emergency kit would be. My fingers felt like they would break as I yanked open the frozen compartment. There they were, 3 magnesium flares, bright red against the white snow. I grabbed them just as I felt the air grow colder. The shadows had followed me. I ran, back toward the lodge, but stopped dead in my tracks. Through the window I could see Mike. He wasn't moving anymore. He was covered in frost like a statue made of ice. The shadow beings were circling him, drinking the last of his warmth. Something inside me snapped. Maybe it was losing my brother to these mountains. Maybe it was watching my friend freeze. But I wasn't going to let these things win. I struck the first flare. It burst to life with a light so bright and hot it hurt my eyes. The shadow nearest to me shrieked, a sound like breaking ice, and backed away. The magnesium flame was different from regular fire. It burned so hot the shadows couldn't swallow it, but they were smart. 2 of them circled behind me while the third stayed in front. I struck the second flare and held one in each hand, swinging them in wide arcs to keep the shadows back. That's when I saw it. Each time the flare's light touched them, the shadows got a little smaller. They weren't just afraid of the heat. It was actually hurting them. I had an idea. A crazy, dangerous idea. I ran back into the lodge, straight to the storage room. The shadows followed, thinking they had me trapped. But I knew something they didn't. The room was full of cans of heating fuel. "You want heat?" I yelled, striking the last flare. "Let's see how much you can take." I threw the flare at the fuel cans and dove behind a metal shelf. The explosion was like a miniature sun. The lodge's walls burst outward as flames shot up into the dark sky. The shadows screamed, their forms breaking apart in the intense heat. I crawled through the snow, away from the inferno. The shadow beings were caught in the fire, their dark shapes twisting and shrinking until they vanished like smoke. The lodge burned bright against the endless night. As I watched it collapse, I saw something impossible. A thin line of pink on the horizon. Sunrise. The first real dawn in what felt like forever. I looked at Mike's frozen form, now peaceful in the growing light. "We did it," I whispered. "They're gone." But even as the sun finally rose, I knew this wasn't really over. Deep in the mountains, in the darkest corners where light never reaches, they would wait. Wait for another long night, another lonely traveler, another chance to feed. And somewhere in my mind, I could still hear them calling. They found me 3 days later, walking along the road that leads to the park entrance. The rescue team didn't believe my story about the shadow beings. They blamed everything on a gas leak and the extreme cold. They said that's what caused the explosion, what killed Mike. But they couldn't explain why the temperature readings for those days were impossibly low, or why the sun hadn't risen when it should have. I couldn't stay in Alaska after that. Every shadow made me jump. Every dark corner seemed to hide something waiting to feed. I moved to Hawaii, where the days are long and the nights are warm. I got a job giving helicopter tours to tourists, staying high above the ground in the bright sunshine. But I can't escape it completely. Every year, during the winter solstice, the longest night, I see things in the dark, shapes that shouldn't be there, movements that aren't natural. And sometimes, when it's very quiet, I hear that whispered language coming through my radio, like ice crackling in the dark. The Park Service hired a new winter caretaker for Denali. They rebuilt the lodge, stronger and better than before. But every caretaker since then has quit before winter's end. They all report the same things. Strange frost patterns, unexplained power failures, and shadows that move against the wind. I keep all my rooms bright now. I sleep with the lights on. But I know that somewhere in those mountains, in the deepest dark of winter, those things are still hungry, still waiting. And sometimes, on cold nights, I dream about Mike's frozen face and wonder if he's still there, trapped in the endless darkness with them. Last week, I got a letter from Jake, my old Inuit friend. He said the elders are worried. The dark times are coming again, they say. The shadows are spreading. They're not just in Alaska anymore. So if you're ever alone on a winter night and you feel the temperature drop suddenly and the shadows seem a little darker than they should be, run. Run as fast as you can toward the light, because now you know what I know. Not all shadows are empty, and some kinds of darkness are very, very hungry. The hunger in the hills. I've seen things in these mountains that no man should ever have to see. Things that make the horrors I witnessed in the Pacific during the war look like child's play. But I need to write this down to warn others about what lurks in the shadows of the Shenandoah Hills. My name is Bob Henderson, and this is my story. It all started on an early October morning, the kind where the fog hangs low between the trees, and your breath just starts to show in the air. I was tracking deer through the national park. It's my job as a ranger to keep tabs on the wildlife. The morning felt wrong from the start. The birds weren't singing, and the usual chattering of squirrels was missing. Just silence. Dead silence. Kept touching the old compass in my pocket, a habit I picked up during the war. Mary used to tease me about it before the cancer took her 2 years ago. She'd say, "Bob Henderson, that compass of yours is going to wear a hole right through your pants." The memory made me smile, but it faded quickly when I saw what was ahead of me. The deer tracks I'd been following led to a small clearing, and that's where things got strange. Frost. Thick white frost coating the grass and leaves in perfect circles, like someone had drawn them with a giant compass. It was at least 50 degrees out. Frost shouldn't have been possible. I knelt down to touch it, and it was colder than any natural frost I'd ever felt. It burned my fingers like dry ice. That's when I smelled it. The metallic tang of blood mixed with something else, something that reminded me of meat left too long in an icebox. Following the scent, I pushed through some bushes and found what was left of the deer I'd been tracking. Its body was torn open, but not like any mountain lion or bear attack I'd seen in my 15 years as a ranger. The organs were frozen solid, like they'd been stored in a freezer, in Virginia, in October. My radio crackled, making me jump. "Henderson, you copy?" It was Dave from Dispatch. "Yeah, go ahead," I answered, my eyes not leaving the deer carcass. "We've got another missing hiker report, third one this week. Family's getting worried. Says he was supposed to check in 2 days ago. Last seen near the old mining trails." I grabbed my notebook, trying to keep my hand steady as I wrote down the details. 3 hikers missing in a week wasn't normal. Nothing about this was normal. "I'll head that way now," I said, but took one last look at the deer. Something caught. my eye that made my blood run cold. Next to the carcass, pressed into the bloody frost, was a footprint. It started out looking human, but then stretched and elongated, like whatever made it had its feet pulled into impossible shapes. The compass in my pocket felt heavy, and for the first time since the war, I felt that same feeling of being watched by something hostile, something hungry, something that didn't belong in this world. I'd faced death before, both in the war and when I lost Mary. But as I stood there staring at that twisted footprint, I knew I was about to face something worse. Much worse. Looking back now, I wish I'd called in sick that day. But then again, maybe it had to be me. Maybe all those years of tracking, all those dark memories from the war, maybe they were preparing me for what was coming, for what was already here, hunting in my mountains. I spent the rest of that day checking the old mining trails, calling out for the missing hikers. The sun was setting when I heard the first voice. "Help me." It sounded like a young woman, maybe college-aged, like the second missing hiker, but something was off about it. The voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "This is Ranger Henderson. Keep calling out," I shouted back, but there was only silence. I pulled out my flashlight as darkness crept in. The beam looked weak against the growing shadows between the trees. That's when I noticed the temperature dropping. Fast. My watch showed 65 degrees, but I could see my breath coming out in thick clouds now. Within minutes, I was shivering. The cold reminded me of nights in the Pacific, but this felt different, unnatural. I found the first set of footprints as my flashlight swept the ground. They started normal enough, regular boot prints in the dirt, but as I followed them, they changed. Each print got longer, the toes stretching out, becoming more like animal claws than human feet. Just like the prints by the deer. The wind picked up, and with it came another voice. This time it was Mary's voice, calling my name just like she used to. My heart nearly stopped. "Bob? Where are you, honey?" I knew it couldn't be her. I'd held her hand when she died. I'd buried her. But hearing her voice again, I had to remind myself that whatever was out here, it wasn't my wife. The cold was biting now, and strange frost patterns were spreading across the ground like spider webs. I needed shelter. The old cave system used by miners wasn't far, and I knew it would be warmer inside. The cave entrance was half hidden behind some bushes. As I pushed through, my flashlight beam caught movement inside. I nearly jumped out of my skin, but it was just an old man, huddled near the wall. "Thank goodness," he said, his voice shaky. "I got lost hours ago. The weather turned so suddenly." He looked harmless enough. Thin, probably in his 70s, wearing clothes too light for the cold. But after 20 years as a ranger and 4 years in the war, I'd learned to trust my gut. And my gut was screaming that something was wrong. Names. "Tom," he said, smiling. His teeth looked too sharp in my flashlight beam. "Was up here looking for the old Morrison mine. Quite a story behind that place." I kept my distance but played along. "What kind of story?" "Oh, a dark one." His eyes reflected. "My flashlight like a cat's. Back in 1907, 12 miners got trapped during a cave-in. Lasted 2 months before rescue teams reached them. Only 3 survived." He leaned forward. "Want to know how?" I didn't, but he told me anyway. They ate the others. But that's not the worst part. His smile grew wider. The hunger changed them. Made them into something else. Something hungry. Always hungry. The temperature in the cave plummeted. I could see ice crystals forming on the walls. The old man's skin looked different now. Almost see-through. Like I could see frozen organs. Beneath it. Want to know what they became, Ranger Henderson? I hadn't told him my name. His joints started cracking as he stood up, his body stretching taller and taller. His skin split along his skull as antlers began pushing through, dripping with frozen blood. I ran. Behind me, what used to be an old man let out a sound that was part laugh, part scream. The thing that had been waiting in these mountains for almost a century was finally showing itself, and it was hungry. I ran faster than I ever had in my life. The thing behind me was no longer pretending to be human. Each time its feet hit the ground, I heard the crack of breaking ice. The temperature had dropped so low that my lungs hurt with every breath. "Running won't save you, Henderson," it called, out in Mary's voice, then switched to the young woman's voice from earlier, then to sounds that no human throat could make. Snow was falling now. Thick, heavy flakes that shouldn't have been possible in October. The wind howled between the tar trees, turning the forest into a maze of white. My flashlight beam couldn't cut through more than a few feet ahead. I knew these mountains better than anyone, but in this supernatural blizzard, everything looked wrong. Trees appeared where they shouldn't be. Paths ended in solid rock walls. It was like the Wendigo, I finally let myself think that word, was changing the forest around us. The creature was playing with me. Sometimes its footsteps seemed far away. Then suddenly they'd be right behind me. My legs burned from running, and the cold was seeping into my bones. I pulled my compass out, trying to find my way to the ranger station, but the needle was spinning, wildly. Then I heard it right above me. I looked up to see it crawling face down along a tree branch, its head twisted completely backward to stare at me. Its skin was like dirty ice, showing dark frozen organs underneath. The antlers were covered in frost and old blood. Its eyes glowed with a blue-white fire that hurt to look at. "Found you," it said in my voice. I turned to run, but my foot caught on a hidden root. The ground disappeared beneath me. I'd run right into Miller's Ravine. I tumbled down the steep slope, hitting rocks and trees. Something in my chest cracked. When I finally stopped rolling, pain shot through my ribs every time I breathed. The Wendigo jumped down the entire ravine in one leap, landing so hard it cracked the frozen ground. It walked toward me slowly now, enjoying my fear. 9 feet tall, with arms that reached nearly to the ground, fingers ending in long black claws. "Your fear makes the meat sweeter," it said, its jaw unhinging like a snake's. Just like the others, the hikers, that deer, also afraid at the end. I tried to get up, but my ribs screamed in protest. The creature reached for me with those terrible hands. I could see the remains of its last meal frozen inside its transparent chest. That's when my hand touched something metal in the snow. An old minecart track. We were near one of the emergency supply caches. The Wendigo must have seen something in my eyes change. It lunged forward, but I rolled away despite the pain. My hand found what I was looking for, a loose piece of track, about 2 feet long. As the creature's claws raked the ground where I'd been, I swung the metal bar with everything I had. It connected with the Wendigo's knee with a sound like breaking glass. The creature howled, a sound that shook icicles from the trees. That gave me just enough time to spot the old mining tunnel entrance, half hidden behind some frozen bushes. The tunnel would be dangerous, probably unstable after all these years, but right now it was my only chance. I scrambled to my feet, holding my broken ribs with one hand, and ran into the darkness. The Wendigo's enraged screams echoed behind me. I had a plan now, a desperate one, but as I heard the creature charging into the tunnel after me, I knew I was running out of options. The mining tunnels might be my grave, but maybe, just maybe, they could be the Wendigo's prison too. If I could just make it to the main shaft, where I knew the emergency supplies were kept, where the dynamite was stored. The old mining tunnel was pitch black, but I couldn't risk using my flashlight. Behind me, I could hear the Wendigo's claws scraping against the rock walls. The sound reminded me of nails on a chalkboard, only 100 times worse. My ribs felt like they were on fire, and each breath came with a stabbing pain. But I kept moving, running my hand along the damp tunnel wall to guide me. The cold was even worse down here. Every breath came out as thick fog. I knew these tunnels from my ranger training. The main shaft should be coming up with its emergency supply cache. Just had to keep going. Just had to. My foot hit something soft. Nearly fell, and without thinking, I clicked on my flashlight. I wish I hadn't. The beam showed me what I'd stumbled over. A frozen body propped against the wall. One of the missing hikers. His face was frozen in terror, and parts of him were missing. Above him, Wedged into a crack in the ceiling was another body. And another. The Wendigo had been storing them like a spider's pantry. I fought, down the urge to be sick. The creature's laugh echoed through the tunnels. It sounded like breaking icicles. It was getting closer. That's when I spotted the old fire tower logbook clutched in the first hiker's frozen hands. He must have found it somewhere and brought it down here. With shaking fingers, I pulled it free and shoved it into my jacket. Blast of freezing air hit me from behind. The Wendigo was getting closer, bringing its unnatural winter with it. Ice crystals were forming on the tunnel walls. Finally, I saw it, the entrance to the main shaft. And there, half buried under decades of dust and rust, was the emergency supply box. I stumbled toward it, my fingers trembling as I worked the old latch. Inside was exactly what I needed. 3 sticks of dynamite, old but still good. Standard emergency supplies from the mining days. There were also some matches, a flare, and, thank God, a map of the tunnel scratched onto a metal plate. I pulled out the logbook while I caught my breath. Maybe it would tell me something useful. The pages were stiff with age, but I could still read the entry from October 1932. Oct 15. Something's wrong in the mountains. 3 hunters missing. Found strange tracks in the snow. But there is no snow. It's 60 degrees. Oct 20. Heard voices in the storm. Impossible storm. Saw something moving in the whiteout, not human. Oct 23. It's here, God help me. Remember, it comes every 25 years. Always hungry. Falls only trap it. Burn it all down. The last entry was just a scribble. The pen dragging. Crossed the page like the writer had been pulled away. Every 25 years. I did the math in my head, 1907, 1932, 1957, 1982, 2007, and now 2032. The creature had been here all along, sleeping between its hunting seasons. The temperature suddenly dropped even further. Ice crackled up the walls. I could smell something rot sweet, like decaying meat in a freezer. Clever ranger. The Wendigo's voice echoed from every direction at once. But this is my home, my hunting ground, for over 100 years. I looked at the map, then at the dynamite in my hands. The main shaft went down at least 6 levels. If I could get the creature down to the bottom and bring the whole thing down. But the tunnels were like a maze. One wrong turn and I'd be trapped. And the Wendigo knew these passages better than me. It had been hunting here for generations. Heard movement in the tunnel behind me. A scraping sound, like antlers dragging across stone. Time was up. I had to make a choice. Try to run back to the surface or head deeper into the mines and face this thing once and for all. The memory of those bodies stored in the ceiling made the choice for me. This had to end. Here. Now. I grabbed the dynamite, matches and flare, and started moving deeper into the earth. Behind me, the Wendigo's laugh echoed through the tunnels, shaking loose small stones from the ceiling. The final hunt was about to begin. I half ran, half stumbled down the mine shaft, counting the levels as I went. The dynamite felt heavy in my pocket. My ribs screamed with every step, but I couldn't stop. The Wendigo's footsteps echoed behind me, sometimes closer, sometimes farther. It was still playing its sick game of cat and mouse. Level 4. Level 5. Almost there. The air got colder as I descended. Ice covered the walls now, thick enough that I could see my reflection in it. My flashlight beam bounced off the frozen surfaces, creating weird shadows that made me jump at nothing. "I can smell your blood, Henderson," the creature called out using Mary's voice again. "You're hurt, tired. Give up now and I'll make it quick." I reached level 6, the bottom. The main chamber opened up ahead of me, supported by thick wooden beams. This was it. My last stand. My hands shook as I set up the dynamite. One stick behind a support beam, another near the chamber entrance. The last one I kept in my hand with the flare. The plan was simple. Get the Wendigo in here, light the dynamite, and try to make it back up before the whole place came down. Simple. Right. I heard it before I saw it. The sound of claws on ice coming closer. I pressed myself against the wall, trying to slow my breathing. The cold was so intense now that frost was forming on my eyelashes. The Wendigo entered the chamber sideways, its tall body twisted in a way no living thing should be able to move. Those terrible glowing eyes swept the room looking for me. "I see what you're planning, Ranger," it said, sniffing the air. "I smell the dynamite, but this place has been my lair for longer than your grandfather's grandfather was alive. You think you're the first to try trapping me?" It was right. The creature had survived down here for over a century. What made me think I could stop it? Then I remembered the bodies stored in the ceiling, the missing hikers, that poor deer. How many more would die if I didn't end this now? I struck the flare. The Wendigo spun toward the sudden light, faster than anything that big should be able to move. I threw the flare at the first stick of dynamite and ran for the exit tunnel. I didn't make it. The creature's hand caught my jacket, yanking me back. Its touch was so cold it burned. We struggled in the flare's red light, my world narrowing down to those terrible glowing eyes and the smell of rotting meat. The dynamite's fuse sizzled. The Wendigo's other hand wrapped around my throat. Together. Then, it hissed. "We'll add your bones to my collection." My right hand pressed against its chest. Through its transparent skin, I could see its frozen heart. Without thinking, I grabbed at it. Big mistake. The cold was unbearable. My hand froze, solid to its chest, stuck to the ice-like flesh. The Wendigo laughed, a sound like cracking glaciers. The fuse was almost gone. I had seconds to make a choice, stay stuck and die in the explosion, or I pulled out my hunting knife with my left hand. "What are you doing?" the Wendigo asked, suddenly not laughing anymore. "Whatever it takes," I growled, and started cutting at my right wrist. The pain was unimaginable, but I kept sawing. Blood splattered on the ice. The Wendigo tried to pull away, but my frozen hand kept it anchored in place. The fuse sparked its last. With a final cut, I tore free and dove for the tunnel. Behind me, the Wendigo screamed in rage. The explosion hit like 1,000 thunderclaps. At once, the shockwave threw me forward as the tunnel collapsed behind me. Rocks and timber crashed down. The Wendigo's scream was cut off suddenly. I don't really remember crawling back up to level 1. The pain from my missing hand and broken ribs turned everything into a blur. I just kept moving, expecting every second to feel those cold claws on my neck. But they never came. When the rescue team found me 2 days later, I was half frozen and bleeding, but alive. They said I was delirious, talking about ice monsters and missing hikers. None of them believed me. But they did find the bodies, stored in the upper tunnels, and they couldn't explain the strange ice formations in the middle of autumn, or why my right hand was perfectly preserved by frostbite, like it had been flash frozen. They sealed up the mine after that, poured concrete down the main shaft, said it was because of structural damage. I know better. That was 5 months ago. I'm at a desk job now, can't do much ranger work with one hand. The official report says I lost it in a mining accident while searching for missing hikers. Simple, clean, easy to understand. The kind of story people can accept. The families of those hikers never got real closure. The bodies were too damaged by cave-ins to be shown at funerals. I attended each one, standing in the back, my right arm ending in a stump. I owed them that much. My compass sits on my desk now. Sometimes when I'm working late, I watch the needle. Most days it points north, just like it should. But sometimes, especially when the evening gets dark and quiet, it starts to spin. The doctors can't explain why my missing hand won't heal completely. The stump stays ice cold, no matter how warm the room is. On bad nights, I swear I can still feel my frozen fingers pressed against that creature's chest, still feel its cold heart beating under my palm. I requested all the old files about the mining area. Found more stories, going back decades. Every 25 years, like clockwork, missing people, strange storms, unexplained frozen bodies. The pattern's so clear now that I can't believe nobody saw it before. Last week, I got a call from Dave at dispatch. A hiker reported finding strange frost patterns near the sealed mine entrance. In October, just like before. I told him it was probably nothing, just a weather thing. But I know better. The concrete they poured down that shaft? It's already showing cracks. Tiny ones, but they're spreading. Like something's pushing up from below. Something patient. Something that can wait. I've started making copies of all my notes, the old logbook. Everything I know about the Wendigo. In 25 years, I'll be too old to fight it again. But maybe someone else will find these records. Maybe they'll believe them. Maybe they'll be ready. Because I know the truth now. You can't kill something that's been feeding on death for over 100 years. You can only trap it. Slow it down. Wait for it to get hungry again. So I sit at my desk, do my paperwork, and watch the seasons change through my window. But every time it gets cold, every time I see my breath fog in the air, I remember those glowing eyes in the dark, and I wonder, when it breaks free, and it will break free, who will be there to stop it? Sometimes, on the coldest nights, when the wind blows just right through the mountains, I swear I can still hear it calling. Still using Mary's voice. Still hungry. Still waiting.